Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Fan. I'm the Vice Provost for International Studies and Global Engagement. I'm also Professor of Geography. And I'm here to welcome you on behalf of UCLA and also on behalf of UCLA Chancellor Jean Block, who sends his regards for not being able to be here, but he is so delighted that we are having this program today. In particular, I wanted to thank our panelists for speaking today in this discussion. And I would like to thank, on my immediate left, the Honorable James Omosa, Rwoti, Deputy Consul General of Kenya. To his left, His Excellency Hossam Eldeen Ali, Consul General of Egypt. And to his left, the Honorable Thandile Babalwa, Sunduza, Consul General of South Africa. And the Honorable Jordan Garcia, Honorary Consul General of Guinea, who spearheaded this event. And His Excellency, Dr. Crisantos Ondo, Ambassador of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, who co-spearheaded this event. And to his left, very proud, a Bruin, Elisa, who is an MA student in Latin American Studies, who is here to help translation. Thank you, Elisa. In the audience, we also have Mr. Wajanda Chambishi in the front here. He's Director of International Relations Policy and Protocol from Mayor Karen Bass's office. Welcome. Well, some of you may know that Los Angeles has the second largest consular community in the world after New York City, with 105 countries currently maintaining a consulate in the city. And UCLA works very closely with the consular community. For example, just 18 months ago, we collaborated with the Los Angeles Consular Corps on an event, Global Challenges Local Responses, as part of UCLA's International Education Week in November 2022. And in that event, more than 25 consuls general came. And this is a great example of how UCLA expands our reach as a global university, which is one of the 5 pillars of the UCLA strategic plan. And the way we do that is to connect with the city while we also connect with the world. And today is another very valuable opportunity to collaborate with consuls general who are based in the United States and based in Los Angeles. And I would like to thank the African Studies Center, Director Harold Torrance, who's just standing next to me, Deputy Director Erica Angem, as well as Sheila Breeding, and our students, James, Clarissa, Tolson, and Elisa, for all your important work. Thank you. And of course, also Professor Subukwi Odinga for moderating the panel. I wanted to end my welcoming remarks on a personal note. So I'm a geographer. My own research is migration, in particular migration in China. And in that connection, I have had a chance to visit a small city in China called Yiwu. And Yiwu is 190 miles from Shanghai, and it is known to be the largest market of commodity wholesales in the world. And not only that, but the city has a significant number of migrants from Africa, involved mostly in trading. So based on research on international migrants in EU, I actually co-published a paper that just came out earlier this year. So I'm here to learn about US-China in Africa, but I'm also here to learn about the significance of your discussion for African migrants, not only in China, but all over the world. So thank you once again to all the panelists. Thank you to all the attendees. I know many of you are from UCLA, but also many of you are from the community. And community engagement is a big part of what UCLA does. So thank you very much for coming and enjoy the discussion. And I'll turn it to Harold.
Hi, everybody. I am Harold Torrance. I'm the director of the African Studies Center. So I just wanted to take a second to kind of build on Cindy's remarks and welcome everybody here to UCLA and say thank you for taking some time out of your day to hear this really interesting discussion. So I also wanted to, in particular, thank the people who, as Cindy said, spearheaded this entire project. So that's Jordan Garcia, and also to Dr. Sobukwe Odinga, who is a professor in the UCLA African American Studies Department, who has agreed to moderate this discussion. And in addition, I want to thank Erica Anjum, who's the second in command at the African Studies Center, and Sheila Breeding, who's back in the room, somewhere in the back of the room, who has done kind of all the behind-the-scenes work in putting this together. So please take a second to just thank all of these folks with me. And with that, I will turn things over to Jordan and Sobukwe.
I met Sheila 12 years ago. And 12 years ago, I was appointed by the Republic of Guinea as an honorary consul. And the first things I did when I was appointed, I contacted many universities in Los Angeles and California, USC, Berkeley, many of them, to introduce myself, and especially in university who has African department. And no one answered me. And the only person who answered me was Sheila. And I said, wow. And she answered me immediately. So I came to, she scheduled an appointment. I came to see her. And she was very surprised to see a white person representing an African country. So I said, wow. And she was very surprised because she told me she was the first time she saw a consul general coming to the African Study Department. And it was 12 years ago. And she was so nice, and she said, what do you want to drink? And I said, do you want to drink a coffee, a tea? And she said, and I still remember, she said, I have very good tea. I think it was from Ethiopia or Kenya. So I have a tea with her, and I immediately see she was a good person. She has a very good heart, and she was very interested about Africa. And she's doing an incredible job at the African Study Department, and without her, of course, we will not be here today. And she's always here when I contact her. So thank you, Sheila, for all the work. And sometimes, diplomats, sometimes we always give a certificate to the mayor, to the governor, and we always forget people like Sheila, because not only she works for UCLA, for the UCLA African Study Department, but she's also an ambassador for us, because she has many programs about Africa. She does a lot for Africa in UCLA. So thank you, UCLA, and thank you, Sheila.
So we'll begin today by allowing each of our illustrious panelists to introduce himself or herself. Obviously, we'd like to thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon. Right? We will allow 15 minutes at the end of the dialogue for questions. Some cards should be coming around, and you can write your questions on these cards. They'll be brought up front to me, and I'll select from among them, and I'll pose them to the diplomats who are represented here on the panel. But first, we'll begin by having them introduce themselves and offer a few insights with regard to diplomacy and contemporary regional affairs and relations between the United States and China and African states.
Thank you, Brother Odinga, for giving me the opportunity to introduce myself. But before I do, allow me to thank the administration of this university, the director of the Department of African Studies, for giving us the opportunity to be here today to be able to share something about Africa and how we relate to the United States of America and how we relate to other partners, including China. My names are James Omosa. James Omosa is the Deputy Consul General at the Consulate General of the Republic of Kenya in Los Angeles. I'm not too academic like you guys here, but all I know is that one time I was in university at Kenyatta University in Kenya, where I studied economics. Later went to the University of Nairobi, where I did my Master of Business Administration. But upon being placed as a diplomat, I realized I needed to know more, which took me back to King's College in London, where I did my second master's in international security studies. And for a while, I've served as a diplomat, as an economist in the Ministry of Trade of the Republic of Kenya. Later on, joined the Foreign Service, where I continue to serve for the last 17 years and probably in a few years to come. So this is my summary introduction. Thank you.
My name is Hossam Ali. I'm the Consul General of Egypt in Los Angeles. I'm a career diplomat with 34 years of a 34-year career, and nobody should make any math assume that I started age 10, and I obtained a PhD in international studies and international security on deterrence theory in 1999 from the University of Vienna, Austria, and I have been negotiating a number of key agreements. I attended tens of meetings in the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna and others. I served 10 years in Vienna, 4 of which with the mission of Egypt and embassy in Vienna, and the rest with the United Nations. I also served in New York, in charge of the first committee on international security and disarmament for 4 years, and a year as senior advisor to the President of the General Assembly on disarmament and international security. So, yeah, did you hear anything? I am not an expert on African issues, but I, of course, have an African. I represent a very proud African country, and I'm all African in so many ways. So I think today we'll just have some discussion. I should have, of course, started by thanking Professor Fan, by thanking the Center for African Studies director, our moderator today, and others. And I think I thank you all for your interest. It's very rare on such a fantastic day to have people choose willingly to stay in a room and hear from people like us on such a complex issue. But thank you for letting us see you all, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Greetings. My name is Thandile Sunduza. I'm the Consul General of South Africa in the United States, responsible for 14 West Coast states. I would like to thank the university, UCLA, firstly, to say thank you so much for hosting us. And it will be an honor for me as South Africa celebrates the 30 years of freedom. This university was very keen in striking, staying down with apartheid. So I want to thank you all. Many were students here, I believe. So UCLA is still on our history. Okay, I think I'm the youngest in the panel. You can see for yourself. I was born in South Africa during the height of apartheid. So my life has been politics all my life. I've just became a diplomat in 2020 when I was appointed by the President to be here in the United States. I've been a member of Parliament. I've sat on the committees on security, on defense, on intelligence, but it doesn't mean you must be scared of me, so I'm not going to look after you. So, sports and recreation, arts and culture, and my experience mostly is also peacekeeping, because I've done a bit of peacekeeping missions in Africa, in a few countries, including Zimbabwe. I've been in the Middle East as well. I won't mention the countries. I don't want us to go there. You know what I'm talking about. So I've been there before. South Africa, as you know, with its regional politics and its politics internationally, we've been raised to raise our views And our constitution speaks of the values of humanity. So humanity is the first thing that becomes to us before politics. So human rights issues become very important to us as well. And the issues of women internationally. I'm happy to see women because women in the global space have been oppressed. So we are fighting the space to be open for women. That is one of my key objectives. You know, when I saw the director in this international as a woman, I said, oh, here we go. Then I raised my fist up. So what I would want to say about my country, that in the regional politics, we don't fight with anyone. Everyone is our friend, whether we disagree with you or we agree with us. Because we live on the values of Nelson Mandela to say, before you become a politician, you become a human being. I just want to say that Parliament has taught me as well to say that legislation is very important, that as we legislate, we think of a unipolar world, not only of a certain part of the world. So it's a very interesting topic, and I hope this is not about to say the Cold War, but to say the differences of opinions and the differences of ideology, which we are very happy to discuss today. Thank you so much.
So my name is Jordan Garcia. I'm the Honorary Consul of the Republic of Guinea. My name is very long, so it's Jordan José María Garcia Galar. So it's very long. And I have a French accent because I was born in the French Alps from a Spanish family who immigrated to France in the 60s. So we are all immigrants somewhere. And I live in the US for 25 years with my wife Tanya, and she was a student actually here at UCLA. It's the reason I love UCLA. And I go to Africa many months a year, especially Guinea. It's a country I really love. It's a very rich country in minerals. We have the biggest reserve of bauxite in the world, aluminium, and now we are building the biggest iron ore mine in the world and in Africa. It's called the Simandou. It's a $15 billion project, and the railroad now is it's 700 kilometers, and we did already 30% of it. So there is many interest for many countries, especially for Guinea. And I like to say, because sometimes people say, oh, he's white, he represents an African country. And I always use the word of Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana. And he always say, I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but I'm African because Africa was born in me, I say.
I try to speak in Spanish. I think estamos en un contexto donde también la diversidad es muy importante y prefiero hablar un poco en español y con la ayuda de mi intérprete podremos entender un poco lo que quiero decir. Me llamo Crisantos Obama.
I would like to say a little bit in Spanish because I think that diversity is very important. So with the help of my translator, I'm going to talk in Spanish and English. My name is Crisantos.
Soy el nuevo embajador de Guinea Equatorial acreditado en Washington, de los Estados Unidos.
It's the new ambassador of Equatorial Guinea is in Washington.
En principio estoy muy agradecido de estar en esta importante sesión de trabajo, esta importante sesión de reflexión.
I'm very thankful of being here in the space of work and also reflection.
Y quiero extender mis cordiales saludos a todas las autoridades de la ciudad de Los Ángeles. Ayer tuve la oportunidad de saludar a la alcaldesa y quiero saludar a las demás autoridades aquí presentes y especialmente también las autoridades de la universidad.
I want to greet everyone that is here, especially the governments, the representative of the government and also of the organization of the UCLA.
Llevo 6 meses en Washington. Mi primera formación es botánica. Estudié la botánica, quiere decir la biología vegetal.
Tiene formación en biology, so he studied botanics.
Empecé a trabajar durante más de 6 años en el contexto de África Central, en el bosque denso de África Central.
Worked for more than 6 years in the Central Africa with the botanics of Central Africa.
Y me topé con un problema realista, es decir, estábamos hablando de conservación de los bosques. En esta conservación llegaron conflictos entre los humanos y los animales, concretamente los elefantes.
Once he was talking about the conservation of the environment, and of this conservation, a lot of conflicts came up, specifically between humans and the animals, specifically the elephants.
Lo que me hizo, ese programa me hizo pues poder cambiar de ciencias aplicadas, biología botánica, a ciencias sociales, y empecé a estudiar ciencias sociales.
Y después de conflicto...
Inglés.
Oh my gosh, sorry. Because of this conflict, he passed to study not only botanics, but also social sciences.
Pues me fui a España, estudié en España y estudié en Bélgica. Tengo un doctorado en Relaciones Internacionales y un máster en Ciencias Políticas y Sociología.
Also has studied in Spain and has a master's and doctorate. PhD.
Empecé el trabajo diplomático acreditándome pues, como representante permanente de Guinea Ecuatorial ante la Agencia de Naciones Unidas en Roma, FAO, FIDA y Programa Mundial de Alimentos.
His diplomatic work began in Rome. Yeah.
Después de Roma, pues fui a representar mi país en Marruecos durante 2 años como embajador ante el gobierno marroquí.
Después, after went to Morocco to represent Equatorial Guinea for 2 years.
Y los últimos 5 años he estado trabajando como representante de Guinea Ecuatorial en Etiopía ante la Unión Africana, razón por la cual es para mí importante poder hablar de África aquí y sobre todo sobre el contexto de las relaciones actualmente en curso, relaciones entre China en África y Estados Unidos en África.
For the last 5 years, have represented not only Equatorial Guinea but also Ethiopia and the African Union. And I'm sorry, can you repeat it? He's pleased to be talking here about African relationships, not only between Africa but also with China and other countries internationally.
Sabemos actualmente que las 2 economías mundiales más importantes son la economía china y la economía americana. Y es bueno que sepamos cómo esas 2 economías trabajan en África, razón por la cual yo creo que podría compartir algunas reflexiones con ustedes aquí en este evento.
The economy of China and United States currently are the both more important in the world, so he's very pleased to, and we need to talk about this subject and how these economies and these relationships can affect Africa. So he's very pleased to have this space here to talk about it, to discuss.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
And as mentioned, my name is Sabukwe Odenga. I'm an assistant professor here. My formal training is in international relations and political science. And the questions that I'll raise today are informed by that training. I think we're honored to have diplomatic representatives from such a diverse array of African states. And I'll begin the questions by asking a matter of continuity and change, particularly given the title of the panel. Right? So I would ask, in what ways do you think the motivating factors and interest of the U.S. and China in Africa now, right, align with or are different from those of the past? Right? We can begin perhaps with Deputy Consul Omosa. Right? How would today's interest perhaps be different from those of the past?
Thank you, Professor, for asking that question. But first, as I said, I'm not academic, so I look at it as a normal bureaucrat. To start with, I remember the topic that you was floated is about the scramble for Africa in the context of China and the United States. Looking at this subject, I begin to reflect on what happened in Berlin 1844, and at what happened, what was the driving force that time, and how does it compare to what is happening today? That time, the European countries were looking at Africa as a source of resources, of course, and of course, an area of settlement. Therefore, they decided to divide Africa for purposes of apportioning and transferring some people to stay or going to engage in economic activity. But of course, with lots of control. Today, I don't know whether that topic really applies. And I have a reservation, and this is why I have the reservation. Because if you look at it, you will find America not controlling anything in Africa. You will find China not controlling anything in Africa. But at the core of their operations, they are all seeking for influence in Africa, not more of control of anything. I know there has been a lot of discussions here and there have been a lot of writings, some alleging that China is trying to muscle Africa, China is controlling Africa, China is overexploiting African resources. But as an African who live in Africa and every day working on relationships between countries, I look at it differently. My look at it is that we have two countries, United States and China, looking at Africa in terms of friendship and mutuality. What can China gain from Africa? What America can gain from Africa? But at the same time, what we Africans look to gain from these two countries, and we engage at that level. So, in terms of the differences between that time and now, it is the motivations. That time, the motivation was to gain access and control. The motivation this time is to gain success. Number two, to gain influence and then access to opportunities that are available in Africa and which can be enjoyed on a mutual basis. And that is what exists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I tried to put some elements here. I had a colleague of mine, we had a discussion, and I asked her to put the ideas we discussed in a piece of paper. So if you allow me, I have to read it, otherwise she's never going to talk to me again.
Please do.
So I just want to talk in general, saying that the topic itself, hearing about it from the very beginning, required some clarifications that we're not talking about Africa as a subject to global powers, but actually that Africa today is very different than what Africa used to be a few decades ago. The potential that Africa holds on so many levels is extremely strong to make it a subject. So let's say that we need to be looking at this topic as three main partners: a continent that is very strong, has very strong organizational dynamics among its members, has very clear goals, has successes against poverty, successes in development, successes in technological progress. Of course, there's still in Africa, in different African corners, some challenges. We still have some challenges in terms of mismanagement of resources, corruption, poor education. But the good thing is that there is very strong work done in that regard. So Africa, of course, is now having a population of 1.4 billion people, which is something very significant. Presents a big share of world population. In 2050, this figure is expected to reach 2.5 billion. So a massive portion of world labor force will come from Africa. And the way Africa is developing today, the role of Africa on the global scene will be far more diverse and far more effective and far more influential, both in the United States and in China. So we have to look this in that light. In addition to this economic growth that Africa is witnessing, Africa's role in the global response to climate change is pivotal. Of course, we know that climate change is a topic relating to the continuity of the very existence of mankind, and it's very important to see how Africa plays a role in this regard. So the continent holds a significant share of global supply of cobalt, manganese, platinum, crucial components for batteries and clean hydrogen technologies. Moreover, Africa is leveraging technology to address climate change with innovative solutions in renewable energy and sustainable agriculture. Solar power in particular is gaining traction in African countries due to its affordability and abundant sunshine, potentially accounting for 60% of the world's potential solar resources. So African nations are at the forefront of developing sustainable energy solutions utilizing their ample hydro, solar, and wind power resources. So this is, I think, very important to approach this topic. Let me touch maybe on the competition, or the so-called competition between China and the US. The American perception of China's involvement in Africa often includes concerns about debt trap diplomacy by increasing countries' reliance on debts, an antagonist U.S. view that often fails to recognize African nations' interests. And this, of course, there is a line of thought in the United States that looks at it in such way. China's Belt and Road Initiative aims to enhance connectivity and infrastructure development, potentially benefiting African nations along its route. Additionally, China has a role in developmental major projects in Africa. For example, in Egypt, China made substantial contributions to Egypt's new administrative capital, with investments amounting to over $20 billion. So the relations between Egypt and China have been very much driven by mutual interest. And so has been the situation with many other African countries. So let's say that Africa is not on the recipient end only, but Africa is also an interactive player in this relationship, guided by its own goals and its own interests and its own objectives. Let's, for example, highlight that the relationship between Egypt and China has actually strengthened significantly in recent years, characterized by extensive economic cooperation, infrastructure development, projects, and growing trade ties. China's strategy in Egypt often focuses on infrastructure development, such as building roads, bridges, and ports, as well as investing in energy and telecommunications, and capacity building. These investments can contribute to economic development by improving connectivity, facilitating trade, and attracting foreign investment. On the other hand, the US plays a significant role in Africa as well, through various channels, perhaps with different tools, including diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian efforts. Historically, the US has provided aid and assistance to African nations, focusing on areas such as healthcare, education, agriculture, and economic development. Moreover, Egypt enjoys a strategic partnership with the United States, marked by collaboration in counterterrorism, regional stability, Middle East peace process, economic development, and many other areas over the past decades. The US and Egypt have cooperated in regional peace efforts, including mediation in the ongoing war in Gaza, demonstrating their commitment to fostering stability and security in the Middle East and the North Africa region. So, Africa's trajectory in the global economy hinges on addressing its challenges and leveraging its opportunities, while navigating complex geopolitical dynamics and fostering cooperation with key international partners like China and the United States. Through strategic foresight, diplomatic engagement, and a commitment to shared goals such as peace, prosperity, and global stability, the involvement of external powers like China and the United States can have both positive and negative effects on intra-African relationships and regional integration efforts. Maximizing the benefits and minimizing the risks require African nations to assert their agency, prioritize their own developmental goals, and engage with external partners in a strategic and balanced manner. Strong intra-African cooperation and unity are essential for navigating the complexities of external involvement and advancing the continent's collective interests. Diffusing superpower tensions and advancing African interests requires effective diplomatic effort through facilitating dialogue and negotiation to promote mutual understanding and advance shared goals of peace, stability, and development in Africa and beyond. So, areas of joint cooperation would actually include economic development, climate change, global health, and many others. However, there are also areas of competition between China and the United States which require careful management to minimize risks, mostly with regards to exertion of geopolitical influence, technological dominance, security, and competition over military presence and strategic alliances. Essentially, African countries have the potential to negotiate more favorable terms and partnerships with both China and the United States by adopting a proactive, strategic, and unified approach to engagement. Regional integration initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, one of the flagship projects of Agenda 2063 of Africa's development framework, can enhance Africa's collective bargaining power and negotiation tactics by leveraging their collective strength, diversifying partnerships, and prioritizing their development objectives. Both China and the United States need to understand the interest of African countries to diversify their economic and diplomatic partnerships in Africa, and to avoid dependency on a single external power within Africa. So African countries need really to be guided by their own agenda, and they need to maintain a balanced relationship. So it is not one partner has to lead the game, but African countries and African nations have to deal with whoever, as my dear colleague to my left has just mentioned, that we seek our interests with everybody in a balanced way, friendly, and we should be an agent of cooperation rather than divide. And whoever has something that can advance our security, our development, our interests, we should be extending our arms to them and cooperating with them. By engaging with multiple partners, African nations can increase competition among donors and investors, so creating opportunities for better terms and equitable partnerships. This aligns very well with Egypt's foreign policy to diversify its partners with key global and regional powers towards the realization of its national goals, aspirations, and regional commitments and vision. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I usually look at the door when I usually offend people, so I hope today I will not. So, first to say, that topic on its own, I just wanted to start with it to say that we are no longer scrambling for Africa. That was a Berlin conference after 90. We are in partnership with Africa. I think I want to demystify that topic because it feels that we're not independent as states, so but we are independent African states. I think that term must be even removed from us because we are sovereign now. We're not controlled by any power. But further to say that the first thing that I always say between the US and Africa, you must remember that both of them have always had invested interest in Africa. But the problem, the USA, what it did, it invested on humanitarian issues, your usage, your AIDS. So there was this perception that we're aiding Africa, while China looked at the opportunities and built infrastructure and partnered with this infrastructure and all. Now, when the opportunity was seen by the US, now it becomes a bit of a Cold War because what the United States was doing was just mostly building bases, military bases to safeguard its safety, human rights issues, no terrorists and all, while the most important factor is the economic part that we are on. But the second issue, because the issue of BRICS, the bloc, the new bloc, that is making even matters worse because nobody has ever seen Africa as a country that can be a part of a bloc because everybody thought they owned Africa. But now, when the so-called third world countries started now to unite, forming the BRICS, so it had put pressure as well on other economic forums because now after the BRICS was formed, if you remember, it started as BRICS, then it became BRICS. Now it's BRICS Plus, because there are so many countries now that have got this interest as well. So also to say that these are post-colonial issues because if you remember, in the colonization time, it was only about power, who's got much more land, but no one had interest to invest. When I meet investors from the United States, they always say to me, no, Africa and China, South Africa and China. The problem with you want a clean space. The Chinese come when it's dirty. If there's a war, Chinese don't wait for the war to end. While the war is still continuing, they are looking at opportunities. What can we build here? Or what can happen? They have been doing it in the DRC right now. They are doing it in Malawi. Even in Sudan, with the height of the war, you'll find Chinese are looking after the war or while in the war. What is it that we can bring? And that's what I always say to my counterparts in the United States, to say, you want to come when it's clean. So where can we invest? Where can we put money? No, it doesn't work like this. So Chinese have got a different strategy of approach on these matters. So I think that is one of their economic strategy that is working for them, which now becomes like a power issue. It's not a power issue. Yes, China and the US have got different ideologies. But when it comes to economic partnerships, there's no ideology on that matter as well. And I think what also, the interest also is because Africa is becoming young. You saw the presidents are becoming younger. And the younger they become, they don't speak the language of the past. They say it's either you partner with us, as France or US or China, or you leave. It's either you leave 50% or you go. So it is putting pressure now because now there's more minerals that are found. Like in South Africa, chromium is found, there's more platinum. So obviously all the technology that is around the world needs all those kind of minerals as well. And also, just to further say that what Africa needs now is more industrialization, more than aid. We don't need aid anymore. Because this issue of making an aid, and like you look sometimes, the problems we will say in Washington will say, if we don't do this, we take our goal away from you. And then what will African countries say? Okay, if you don't give us a goal, we go to China. So the bullying politics are no longer working for Africa now because we are sovereign. So it's either you agree with us or not. And just also to dismissify, like South Africa, our second biggest trading partner is the United States. So China is very far from. Our first is the UK, then the United States. So sometimes what is being said is not what truly is what is reflecting. We've got a very good relationship with the United States on many issues as well, but sometimes the media can create that independence mentality. But also you must remember, Africa is surrounded by the oceans. The battle now is in the ocean. The economic zone is in the oceans now. We've got the Atlantic, we've got the Indian, we've got the Mediterranean. So it's a battle of economy. So which ships are coming? Who is controlling the seas? So both sides are on each because everyone wants a port. Everyone wants to build a port. You see, so that's why now this interesting is becoming more and more. I thought I should bring, but the most important thing is now is the unity of the African Union. The African Union now, as you know, we've got the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement for 2063. So that has, I think those who used to rule Africa never thought of that. So we are saying Africa, you trade with us, then you move freely in the continent. So sometimes in the economic trade, some tactics won't work at the end of the day because you have to abide by what you agree upon. And politically, remember, I always say, whatever wrong that was done, you can correct it. Because one of the questions I'm always asked is to say that, why are you aligning yourself with China? We've never aligned ourselves with China. We've got a partnership with China as well as a partnership with the United States. But the political struggles will never be forgotten. Who are my comrades during the times of need, But it doesn't mean that those people have taken over. We've got many disagreements with China. As I said, South Africa is open for business for any person. We don't fight with anybody. As Nelson Mandela said, your friends are our friends, but your enemies are not our enemies. So we don't fight with anybody. So that power struggle will need certain attitude to see. If you saw, before I close off, if you saw that Africa, not long ago, the President Kamala Harris visited Africa, Zambia and all, because now it's to try and solve those relations. Because the US, most times, they've seen Africa, like, I'm happy that we did geography. I'll make an example. When I come here in the US, people will ask me, are you from South Africa? Don't you know my friend in Kenya? I'm talking, it shows how Africa has been portrayed. So Chinese have got a different perception to that attitude, because some people still think someone will ask me, do you still always speak good English? And I'm like, but we were colonized by the British, you're supposed to know that, you know? So I'm just trying to say that the mindsets have to shift, then you will understand the economy. That's why I'm saying even the politics here, I'm happy international, it's also good also to understand the other side of politics, even if you don't agree with them, because it might be an economic shift for you. Thank you.
I think there is few things we can say also. It's we have tendency to say Africa, and I have a friend of mine, he said Africa as with an ace, because South Africa, nothing to do with Morocco, very different than Egypt, different than Guinea, and different than Kenya. But everyone say Africa, but there is many Africans. And the thing we can see the past 20 years, it's Africa changed a lot. It's not anymore what it was. And I give you an example. In the Francophone countries, it was the French who controlled most of these countries until 20 years ago. They used to have their own president, but if France said, no, we don't want this one, we remove him. We change it. Or if the guy said, I want to change my country, no, we remove him. And the problem as France now in Africa, France didn't see Africa changing. And in their mind, and I'm French, I can say it, in their mind, it's a colonial time. We are going to remove this minister, we are going to play games, and they didn't understand Africa has choice now. They partner with China, with India, with Turkey, with Egypt also. It's in Africa, but it's a big partner. So it's completely different now. And if you want to control again the political inside, you will be out of the game. And you can see this from many countries, Occidental countries, in Europe, the US a little bit sometimes. If you don't go our way, we may be going to put some sanction on your country. And I think it's a completely wrong way. And when I put the title Scramble for Africa, it's Scramble for partnership. Because now African country, and I talked to about Guinea, we have the biggest investor in Guinea is China. But we have Turkey, a little bit French, a little bit US. Why we don't have too many US companies in Africa? Because US companies, they don't understand Africa. And they are scared about Africa. I talk to many business people, they say, oh my God. I said, Chinese go there all the time. During the COVID, I traveled to Guinea. We were like 6 in the plane. And as soon as we stopped in Paris, the plane was full with Chinese. And they go everywhere. And I said, why you don't go there, try to form partnership with local partner and try to do business. Because if you wait here for African to bring you business, you are going to wait a long time. And in the mining sector, why we say, oh my God, Chinese, they control many mines in Africa. Yes, it's true. Because they have a long-term vision. They have like 10, 15 years vision program. When the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China gets in position, the new one, his first trip is to Africa. First trip, you can check, he goes to Africa immediately. Because they know they need to close partnership for the minerals. Africa needs iron ore. Why they invest 15 billion in Guinea? It's not because they love Guinea. They need iron ore. And they don't want to buy the iron ore from Australia anymore for geopolitical reasons. So they are pushing there. And they are very good partnerships sometimes. Yes, sometimes we don't like them because they don't want to pay minimum wage or this and that. But this is the African country to say, you are going to pay this, that, and they will do it. So what I say to my American friends, you need to go there to learn. And if you're interested, I don't know, in bauxite, go there, try to get people who can help you, and you try to get permits. The other thing Americans are very afraid now, it's China not only they control the mine, the transformation, the fabrication, because they used to make this for us. But now they sell the same one and probably better than us. And we see that with Tesla. Now China are making, I forget the brand, but yeah. And it's probably better than Tesla because they know how to make it. They are making it for years. Yes, there is competition for minerals in Africa, and for US company, they need to partner with the countries there in a win-win situation because there are many things they can bring to Africa. Many things.
Gracias, profesor, con la pregunta. Creo que estamos todos de acuerdo de que en el mundo actual existen dos países competidores enormes, Estados Unidos y China. Son las dos mayores economías actualmente.
I think that now we can all agree that we have two major competitors in the global economy. There's China and the United States.
La otra hipótesis es, siendo las dos principales economías del mundo, tienen campo de confrontación y de competencia que hay que reconocer.
If they're both major countries in the world, they're gonna conflict. They're gonna have fields that they compete.
Pero podemos resumirlo en cuatro sectores importantes. Economía, sale el déficit comercial. Tecnología, inteligencia artificial, robótica. Seguridad, existen sensaciones que señalan ciertos conflictos de China con sus vecinos, sobre todo en el tema de Taiwán. Y después la ideología, el miedo a que la ideología occidental sea posiblemente mermada gracias al crecimiento de China. Cuatro principales áreas de confrontación y de competencia.
We have four major areas of influence and also competition. Technology with AI and development of technology. We also have politics, so each one represents one different side.
Economía,
Tecnología,
tecnología, ideología y seguridad.
economy, and also security.
Estos cuatro campos de confrontación son lo que también forman parte de las interacciones diplomáticas entre esos dos países.
These four fields also are in the relationship, diplomatic relationship of these countries.
Los americanos incorporan en sus negociaciones con China elementos diplomáticos, elementos económicos, elementos militares y de inteligencia.
These all fields are in the relationship that the United States have with China.
También cuentan con sus aliados para poder negociar, presionar a China sobre esos cuatro componentes importantes.
And they come with their allies to pressure China in these four elements.
¿Y cuál es la posición de China con respecto a estos problemas?
Y the China position is
Para China, China rechaza cualquier intento de suplantación de Estados Unidos en el mundo.
China doesn't like any tentative of the United States of being overpowered.
China dice que no quiere competir con Estados Unidos, no está compitiendo con Estados Unidos.
China said that it's not competing with the United States.
China está trabajando para desarrollar su sociedad, para modernizar su sociedad, o lo que dice la retórica política china.
China is working only for the development of their society. This is what the Chinese politicians said.
Pero si vemos que China, con toda su potencial y su dimensión, un país de 1.400.000 habitantes, un país extenso, con una densidad de población de 147 habitantes por kilómetro cuadrado, cualquier proceso de modernización y desarrollo implicará obligatoriamente una supremacía de la economía mundial.
With the size of China territory and population, any tentative of development of its country will gonna have impact in the world, gonna overpower because of its size.
1.400.000 habitantes. Estados Unidos tiene cerca de 400 millones de habitantes.
son casi 2 billones. So there are almost 2 billion of inhabitants.
También hay que recordar que Estados Unidos y China trabajaron juntos después de establecer sus relaciones diplomáticas en los años 60. Y gracias a esa cooperación, efectivamente, la economía de China empezó a desarrollarse.
We also have to remember that the United States and China worked together during the 60s. And because of this partnership, China began to develop.
Son los primeros elementos que hay que señalar cuando hablamos del contexto actual sobre la confrontación que puede haber entre China y Estados Unidos.
So we need to talk about these factors to address the current confrontations they can have between the United States and China.
Y a nivel de cooperación con África,
The level of partnership with Africa,
para ser justos, hay dominios paralelos donde gran parte de los países africanos apoyan la visión de China y hay otro dominio donde gran parte de los países apoyan la visión de Estados Unidos.
we have two ways of looking at it. We have African countries that support the United States vision, and we also have another side of African countries that support the China perspective.
A nivel de desarrollo económico y comercial, gran parte de los países apoyan, se inclinan hacia China.
When we talk about economy, development of economy, the majority of the countries support China.
Hay que saber que a partir de los años 1990, China inicia un marco de cooperación con África que fue formalizado en 2013 con el magnífico programa llamado generalmente el programa que resalta toda la implementación de infraestructura en el continente africano.
In the 90s, China began his partnership with Africa, and it was formalized in the 2000s, and it focused on the development of these countries.
A través del programa Franja y Ruta. Franja y Ruta. Franja y Ruta. No.
No.
Este programa... Yeah.
Thank you all.
Pues este programa hizo efectivamente que China se implante en África a través de su tecnología para desarrollar las infraestructuras, prestando dinero y desarrollando infraestructuras en el continente africano, en gran parte de los países.
In this program, China entered the continent to develop the infrastructure. So it affects the infrastructure of these countries.
Otro elemento importante, China empieza con sus foros con África, quiere decir foro China-África, en el año 2000, mientras que Estados Unidos empieza con ese mismo foro 14 años después, en el año 2014.
The relationship began in the 2000s and with China and the African countries, and United States only in 2014.
Pero también hay que saber que hay otros países que también mantienen foros con África, como Turquía y como Japón.
And we also have other countries that maintain conversations with Africa, as Turkey and Japan.
Porque cuando hablamos de cooperación, confrontación, a nivel de África efectivamente existe un oportunismo chino y algo de descuido americano.
So the confrontation and competition in Africa, there is something to do with China, but also something to do with the lack of willingness, let's say, of the United States.
Porque a nivel de la cooperación con África, cooperación para el desarrollo del continente africano, gran parte de los países se inclinan a favor de China.
Because when you talk about the level of partnership, the African countries, the majority of the countries turn to China.
En cambio, cuando se habla del componente de resolución de conflictos, de seguridad y de paz en África, muchos países se inclinan a favor de Estados Unidos.
When we talk about maintain peace, security, most of the countries turn to the United States.
El continente africano es un continente que tiene muchos problemas, desde la esclavitud, explotación colonial, procesos neocoloniales, el terrorismo, lo que hace que el continente esté prácticamente desestabilizado.
Because of slavery, colonial extractivism, exploitation, the continent has a lot of problems.
Ante esos problemas, y a pesar de una presencia fuerte de China, existe una tendencia ambigua de la reacción de China en África con respecto a la seguridad. Porque ha habido lugares donde la gente muere, hay secuestros, pero los chinos están ahí sacando minerales sin intervenir, sin apoyar a la población.
So China doesn't usually interfere in this problem. So there's places where we have murders, we have kidnappings, but China is there mining.
En cambio, en ese sector, Estados Unidos está mucho más eficiente, está mucho más efectivo. En ese sector de seguridad y defensa, Estados Unidos está mucho más efectivo. Porque no puede permitir secuestros, no puede permitir terrorismo donde está operando. En cambio, China sí.
When we talk about terrorism, security, safety, United States is very much active.
Y el punto de convergencia es todos los países africanos, gran parte de los países africanos, o casi todos, quieren mantener buenas relaciones de amistad y cooperación, tanto con Estados Unidos que con China.
The point here in common is that all the African countries have maintained good relationship with China and the United States.
Primero porque tienen mala experiencia de lo que pasó con la Primera Guerra Fría entre Estados Unidos y la Unión Soviética.
First, because they have a bad experience of what happened in the Cold War with the United States and the USSR.
Muchos países africanos tuvieron que verse inmersos en guerras, en muchas guerras.
A lot of African countries saw themselves immersed in wars.
Por lo tanto, los países africanos no quieren una otra guerra fría, quieren una cooperación transparente y que beneficien a las partes.
So the African countries don't want another Cold War, and they want relationship that benefit both of the parts.
Existe un dicho africano que señala que cuando dos elefantes se pelean en el bosque, los arbustos también sufren.
There is a African say that when 12 people fight in the woods also suffer.
Porque cualquier confrontación entre dos grandes economías del mundo podría tener consecuencias negativas para el continente africano.
Because any confrontation of these two big countries in the world can have consequences in the African continent.
Porque confirmo que todos los países africanos quieren tener buenas relaciones de amistad y cooperación, tanto con China que con Estados Unidos.
And this confirms that every African country wants to have very good relationships both with China and United States.
Pero también existen razones de fondo por qué los países africanos lo quieren.
But we also have a background motivation of why the African countries want to maintain this relationship.
Con respecto a China, los países africanos ven a China como un modelo de desarrollo cercano.
Relationship to China, the African countries see China as a development that is closer.
Porque es un país que también, hace años atrás, era un país pobre, pero hoy es una gran potencia. Los africanos también creen que también podemos pasar de la pobreza al desarrollo.
Because a few years back, China was also a country in development. So the African countries now look at China and see the potential that they can also have the same process.
Por tanto, vemos el desarrollo de China como un desarrollo modelo, un desarrollo que podemos copiar.
So they see the development of China as a modern development, a development that they can copy.
Y China también sabe utilizar ese discurso diplomático, ese discurso de cercanía, lo sabe utilizar y lo sabe cultivar.
And China knows how to use this speech of being a more close, more modern example.
Pero los países africanos ven a Estados Unidos como un socio lejano, pero seguro.
The African countries see the United States has a partnership that is far, but also is safe.
Porque mientras que China es un modelo cercano a África y quiere mantener buena relación con China, Estados Unidos es una potencia, un amigo lejano, pero seguro, y también quiere estar con él.
So if China is this country that we can copy the model, is a model that is closer, the United States is far, but it's also very safe and a partnership that they can count on.
A nivel comercial también existen perspectivas paralelas. Muchas empresas americanas son competitivas en muchos sectores y muchas otras empresas chinas son competitivas en otros sectores. Por ejemplo, la construcción de carreteras y puentes. Las empresas chinas son mucho más competentes en ese sector, pero la tecnología avanzada en la salud, en servicios, las empresas americanas son más competentes, son más competitivas.
So we have different expertise for one side, we have China with companies that are very expert, and one of the expertise is the infrastructure, has developed bridges, for instance. And another side, when we talk about service and health, the United States has the most competitive companies.
Bueno, que para terminar esa primera parte, el deseo de los africanos pues es que Estados Unidos se implique fuertemente en el comercio africano, porque tiene mucho potencial, tiene una diáspora dinámica y debe aprovechar esas ventajas comparativas.
So to finish, United States is very much involved in the African continent because it sees its potential and potential to explore this location.
Para terminar con este elemento, pues la diplomacia no necesita atajos. Mientras los funcionarios chinos visitan el continente africano regularmente y reciben a los funcionarios africanos también regularmente y con mucho entusiasmo en sus países, los funcionarios americanos no muestran mucho interés en visitar países africanos.
If one side, China goes to African countries, visit African countries, and allow African workers to go to work in China, the United States is not very interested in going physically to China.
La cultura africana aprecia la cercanía, las visitas. Cuando tú visitas a alguien, le muestras respeto, le muestras amor, y esto conlleva que efectivamente China siga creciendo en África y Estados Unidos debe tener cuidado para poder cambiar modelos de relación. Muchas gracias.
The African culture values the closeness. It shows respect. It shows that you care, and China does that. So the United States needs to be look a little bit more careful to this closeness.
Yes.
Thank you.
Deputy Consul General Omosa would like to offer a few more remarks in response to this question, as would Consul General Ali. Please.
It's a small addition that in understanding, in seeking to understand the competition between China and the US in Africa, we may need to necessarily go back to 1991. As you may recall, in 1991, the USSR went down, began to disintegrate. And as it was disintegrating, or as after its disintegration, the curtain between the East and the West began to fade. And with the fading, the West, who were actually the colonizers of African countries, began to withdraw from what they used to do to African countries. Some of you may recall the statement made in 1994 by the then President of the United States of America, His Excellency Ronald Reagan, whereby he said he does not want to read a statement that connects the US-Africa relations with with development assistance. He doesn't want to read these two statements in one paragraph. What did he have in mind? It was like, we are done with Africa, because now USSR, which used to cause some of the intra-Africa conflicts, is done, and therefore, now that our enemy is out of the way, then there is no need to spend much in trying to defend our position in Africa. And by so doing, the story of Africa in the West began to fade. And no wonder, shortly after, there came this policy that if the West was to extend, of course, when I talk about the West, I'm not talking about the US, I'm talking about the whole bloc, including Europe. If they have to extend an assistance to Africa, it has to pass through the Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank, IMF. And whenever these African countries went to have IMF, World Bank, there was an underlying statement. Any assistance must be accompanied by a statement demonstrating African allegiance to values. Remember? You may not remember if you are not African, I am African and I was in government that time, and of course I remember the subject of values. If you have to get our own, if Kenya was to get our own from IMF and World Bank, first it has to demonstrate that it is ready to embrace the concept of democracy. Of course, democracy as defined in the West and not as defined in Africa. This became a big problem to African governments, and for that reason, they began to think. And I want to give you a very good example. In 2003, we have a new president in the Republic of Kenya. And at that point, things began to change. We were a colony of the British, and as a colony of the British, we always looked at Britain as everything. We are a partner with the United States. Then again, how do we continue with that relationship, which looks like it is putting us into a box? When shall we come out of the box and develop in our country? We began to embrace new partners. And it is around this time China began to emerge in Africa, and it has continued to emerge and to emerge. Why? China was coming. You people, your problems is in infrastructure. Your problem is in healthcare. Your problem is in education. Your problem is poverty reduction. How do you reduce your poverty if you do not have capacity to develop your institutions, capacity to develop your infrastructure, capacity to develop your agriculture, food security, and this in Africa, China occupied that space. But as we come to around 2009, 2010, the West is beginning to realize, something is happening in Africa. Particularly when China began to embrace Africa through FOCAC loans negotiated under FOCAC, the West is like, here there is a challenging teenager, and this teenager must be put where he or she belongs. And it is around this time we began to talk about this aspect of Scramble for Africa. We never used to have it. And it is around this time we began to hear narratives that are making China to look bad in Africa. It is around this time we began to hear narratives about China being interested about resources in Africa and not developing Africa. It is around this time we began to hear the narratives about China bringing its own workers and impose them on Africa at the expense of Africans, and many other stories. But do you believe that is true? Obviously no. If you come to Kenya, for example, I come from Kenya. It seems that the Chinese are embossing loans that will at the end of the day ruin Africa. Of course, I remember we took 465 million Kenya shillings, billion Kenya shillings, which we used to develop a 450 kilometers of rail. And of course, the narrative was Kenya is going to lose the port of Mombasa because China is not a country to joke with. Really? When you go to the ground, you don't find those things. To me, and in summary, this is a matter of great power conflict, attempting to put a halt to a budding, dynamic, and challenging teenager called China, and nothing more than that. But one thing is, Africa is also looking for China. Africa is also looking for America. Africa is also looking for Europe, and saying, all we are out to do, we are looking for mutual partnerships. Let us respect one another. Let us also respect China, because China, it is us who have gone to look for it, because we feel there is something to gain. we are also here to partner with you, United States of America, because we know there's something we are going to gain from you, there's something we are going to gain from us. And Europe, and the same thing. This is what is really happening. And probably we may need to find another name, Mr. Garcia, brother Garcia, another name, and remove
This was
term
Scramble for partnership.
Thank you. It is Scramble for Africa, for partnership, I agree. But the moment you begin to use the word Scramble, you are beginning to reflect the minds of an African like myself to the 1844 story. And that is why it becomes difficult to absorb and grasp into our mind. I wish if we were talking about competition for partnership with Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the discussion this afternoon has been very helpful, and I personally learned a lot from interventions of my colleagues for whom I just really thank them very much. But it comes to my mind as we discuss this further and further that it appears that we are only seeing a small part or an incomplete part of a very complex picture. My assumption is you cannot talk about US-Chinese competition in Africa in a manner that we actually are tending to do, which is assuming that they operate in a vacuum. In Africa, my understanding also is that it is very difficult to talk about a Chinese role without considering the role of the Russian Federation, for example. The Soviet Union did not vanish. The Soviet Union was inherited by the Russian Federation, another extremely strong country that is present in Africa very, very fully. Like my country, for example, we have a massive project, over $30 billion project on power generation, nuclear reactor, for example, that Russia was the one to give us the most competitive bid for, and so on. So in order to look at China and the US competing in Africa, they're not just competing among themselves, because much of Africa is already engaged with other partners that are very strong. For example, look at the Gulf countries. Look at the massive amounts of land that Saudi Arabia has taken in African countries to dedicate to projects of joint agriculture, for example, or cattle development. Look at massive projects that the Emirates have been involved in. And it's very difficult to look at Chinese United States competition while acting like Russia is not there, or that the European Union is not there, or that France is not there, or that Britain is not there. And we also have to bear in mind the associations present. For example, China and Russia cooperate very, very closely, as they together often block U.S. resolutions in the Security Council. They have alliance of cooperation among themselves in trying to hedge the very strong American influence in the Council, for example, and elsewhere. So they have this strategic link that cannot let you consider only China as a challenge or as a competition, because China is very strongly associated with the Russians, and the Russian Federation is a very strong present force in Africa and in the world. So this is very important. And also, as we look at the Chinese-American role in Africa, it's very, very important to realize the extremely complicated situation in the world as a whole, and how these dynamics and dynamics of conflict, both in Africa and well beyond, or in the neighborhood of African territories, is affecting so much the potential that could be achieved by cooperation by African nations, even among themselves, because of all these challenges. For example, look at the conflict in Sudan. Look at the conflict in many of the corners of Africa. It's very, very important to look at those superpowers, such as, or so-called superpowers like China. For example, the emerging competition with the United States. A few decades ago, this could not make sense because it was all about US and Russia. But I think we're very far from a Cold War. But we also need to see that it is in the direct interest of whoever wants to invest in Africa or cooperate with African nations, that they have a very important role. They have a commitment, a moral commitment, and a practical interest in playing a much bigger and effective role in the conflict resolution in Africa. So we need to highlight this and also flag it, and I just will stop there. Thank you.
I know the questions are in because we want to answer your questions. But I think it's very important for me to raise this issue to all of you. The issue also how we define terrorism. President Nelson Mandela and all other comrades were called terrorists. President Mandela couldn't enter the United States because he was still classified as a terrorist, because he was fighting for the liberation of his country. So do many others who now, I think it becomes very, very important how do you define. We were also called terrorists because we were fighting for the liberation of South Africa. But because you don't agree with somebody, you call them terrorists. I'm not saying terrorism is not there. No, it is. But also one of the questions we have to ask, who is also funding these terrorists? You know, I think that's where we start, because at some stage these terrorists are not loyal as well. So now, what is part of this is very important to bring this political aspect, because it also goes to the issue of competition. You see, also the issue of culture. You see, I believe all of you, and I hope you've been to Africa. If you've not, don't talk to me after this. But I just believe all of you have not them, and I'm inviting you there. You see, it is important also the cultural aspect to say that if you don't agree with this culture, I'm not going to trade with you. You know, I'll make an example that some of you might not like. President Museveni in Uganda has taken a step to say, I don't allow this community in my country. Because some of these things have got a cultural aspect as well. Study the culture. You know, what China is doing is also studying the culture as well. You don't come with your human rights issues and then impose them. You see, you also need to understand the culture. Because remember, you cannot just influence a person without understanding where they come from. You know, that becomes very, very important. I was telling somebody that you know, each time I speak to my American, because I love them to say, understand the culture. Also the issue of visas becomes very important, the visa issues, because when we Africans go to China, they don't give us problem with visas, because they know what they want. But our friends, yeah, it's a struggle to get a visa. You know, there are certain reasons. And these are the issues that also bring this competition and tension, because you need to understand issues as well. And I also want to invite you as well to say, the media, you know what I do when I watch media? I watch CNN, I go to Al Jazeera, I go to All Africa. They write a story, but different angles. So it's better to have the same advantage, because the other power that is coming to South Africa, basically, in Africa, is India is becoming a major superpower. I know people are concentrating on the US and China. India is becoming a dangerous super, very silently so. And also the countries in the East. So I think for me, it's very important for you to be very open-minded about some of the issues as well. Not what you are fed, because it becomes a problem now. Because sometimes you want to change a narrative about people. Because everywhere we go, we have to bring these corrections. I think. Thank you. I think we're ready for questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for those comprehensive responses. One question that I have as the moderator, and it builds upon your remarks, is that we see in all of your responses an emphasis on African agency, African influence, African interest. Right? And we see an interest on mutuality and partnership. But even within the closest of partnerships, as you're suggesting, there are points of disagreement. Right? So, when your countries and your governments encounter these points of disagreement with the US or with China around questions of security or economic development, for example, how do you go about confronting these disagreements? And perhaps do you apply different strategies to disagreements with the US than you might apply to disagreements with China as you go about advancing and asserting African interests?
To answer the question in a very short format, let me say, from a diplomatic point of view, and from the Kenyan point of view, we all love all the countries of the world. We embrace them, and I know we have this partnership with every country, despite the differences on how we look at each country and what they do. At the underlying level, we are all friends. And what countries do to navigate this kind of competition, if I may call it that way, is focusing on what is in it for us, mutuality of interests. Today, despite all this that is being said, the United States of America is one of the biggest partners with the Republic of Kenya today, in very many ways. Talk of security, US is number one. Talk of trade and investments, US is bigger than China is in Kenya and other Western countries. Of course, let me continue clarifying that when we talk about US, I am assuming that US is representing the Western countries, including those that are in Europe. So, and our focus as young African countries is where do we benefit from the United States of America, and our focus is exactly on that area. And I want to thank the United States of America that even as they compete with China, it has these strong policies of engaging Africa, particularly the sub-Saharan Africa. And I want to point to one example. When His Excellency President Biden came up with the strategy towards, the US strategy towards the sub-Saharan Africa in 2022, he meant a lot of business, and from where I am sitting here, I can comfortably say that Kenya has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of this agenda of the US government. As late as yesterday, I know we had a big conference in Nairobi where we are discussing businesses and investment, and I can quote one statement I had from Her Excellency Ambassador Mae Whitman, is that in the recent past we have had around $700 million of investments in the Republic of Kenya. And that is what we want to see. But at the same time, Professor, we cannot say that now that we are working closely with the United States of America, we are going to put aside one other partner, in this case, talk of China, and of course, probably let us take China to represent those other countries who do not see one another from the same page with the United States. No, we have to continue. We continue embracing everybody, and that is why if you want to embrace infrastructural development in Kenya and other countries in Africa, you will find that the greatest investor is China, and it still continues being our partner. And even trade and investment, China is very, very big. And of course, I expect another country to be there. Japan is there, is big investment in terms of its investment from the East. Korea has started waking up, and it's coming up with speed in engaging and partnering with Africans, and that is it. So basically, what I'm saying, from where I sit, I see African countries embracing lots of economic pragmatism when it comes to engaging these competing partners. In other words, yes, compete the way you want to compete, but for us, what are we benefiting from each one of you? Although, even if I'm saying this, to some extent, at some level, I can see some level of limited bandwagoning also. Because when we talk of subjects like security in Africa, you know Africa is experiencing a lot of security challenges. We have conflicts, as my brother mentioned, in certain parts of Africa today, and America is heavily involved to bring peace and development in those countries. Number two, when it comes to the fight against terrorism, I know America is heavily involved. And for that reason alone, I can comfortably say a good number of African states, they will prefer some limited bandwagoning behind the United States because it gives that level of guarantee. And for that in itself is a big benefit from the United States. So there is no enemy for Africa, whether there is a competition, all countries are friendly to Africa, and Africa embraces them as such.
I just want to say on the issue of engagement. You see, when you engage, the most important, sometimes diplomacy depends on the stages. You also have to be rough and not compromise. I'll make an example. South Africa is very clear when we trade that we've got what we call a broad-based black economic empowerment. So that means if you trade in South Africa, 50% of the companies you trade with must be black, because of our past. You'd find some countries are not happy about it. The US is not happy, or China is not happy about it. But now we disagree, and then to say no, but the skills, I would say, how would you know the skill of an African person if you have never tested it? So those are sometimes the disagreements, because at some stage, people want to trade with people that they are comfortable with, that have been trading for years. But we've got the policies and the law of South Africa. So we do have those disagreements in trade. So what I'm just trying to say, if then the other country one says, no, we don't agree with the policy, then go away, we'll go for another one. But so that's how we must become, because sometimes if you want property, and part of our policy also says that people living with disability, it's part of our economic, whether you like it or not, if you want to invest in our country, even if you are an investor here, those are some of the things that you are going to meet in South Africa, because this is what it is. Some do not become happy. But as I said when I started as well, also the issue of ideology. You see, you grow up learning the communist nation, whatever, but it doesn't mean that you are one. So people want to bring their ideologies. No, you've got this communist agenda, but I'm saying, if you want to trade with me, you want to my ideology or you want money, because that's what we trade. Because also, you speak about hypocrisy, you'll find people coming to my office, Consul General, South Africa is moving towards a communist, even the American, but you are trading with Vietnam. So what are you trying to say? On the other hand, you have embargoed Cuba. So who's a hypocrite here? So you get to those stages. Now, yes, we do get those deadlocks, but at the end of the day, if people do not engage, like we don't have a US base or a military base in South Africa, because we say we are not fighting with anybody. So some might find, no, what about terrorism? If there's a terrorism, yes, you will intervene. For now, we don't want any base because we might attract enemies for us, So you find ways to be diplomatic about these issues. Yes, we do disagree a lot, because some of the investors who come to my office, the first question they'll say to me, China, and I'll say, if you come here, we're not going to talk about China. What do you want to invest as the United States? Even I've met academics as well, directly, whom I would say, bring US students too. I'll invite you as well to say, come to South Africa, come to Africa to learn a different perspective. No, but you are Chinese, no. And what China also does, just to say as well, they also take students to learn. That it becomes so, what I'm saying, we have those deadlocks. Sometimes they become very, very personal. I don't want to go to the latest politics, but the moment you engage and have dialogues, it's where you find your ways. I think that's the best way.
Thank you. A few things. I don't agree with everything here, but it's normal. We are all brothers and sisters. I think there is a real competition. We can call it Scramble or what we want, but we have to be realistic. There is a real competition between China and the US. We have one economy going up, China, and one who's the superpower in the world who doesn't want to go down. It's a reality. And in Africa, it is like that. And they are competing in Africa. It's not a joke. I talked to many US diplomats in Africa. They say, and this is conversation, submarine conversation, and they all told me our main concern is China. It's China. And in Guinea, their main concern is China. It's true. Because when, we have a Simandou, it's going to be the biggest iron ore mine in the world, all the iron ore will go to China. And I don't know if you know, but China are controlling rare earth, all the rare minerals. And probably you don't know this one. There is one very rare called gallium. And gallium, it's very expensive. It's very rare. You find it in bauxite. And it's a priority for the US and for Europe, because gallium, you find it in microchip, but also in light vision and airplane, like a jet, military. So there is a big concern in the US about that. Why? Because all the gallium they buy it in China, from China. And China, a few months ago, they said, okay, we're going to raise the price of 40%. And it is a concern for the US. Because it's tomorrow your battery for your Tesla will cost $120,000 and not anymore $40,000. The price of the Tesla is going to cost $150,000. And it's a reality. The other thing, we were talking about Sahel and security. And in Niger, we have a coup d'etat a few months ago. And the US, they have a major military base in Niger. They spend more than $100 million in Niger in this military base. And after the coup, of course, they condemned the coup like everyone, but they went there to negotiate. And I knew what will happen. They went there to negotiate, and I have friends from Niger who told me what happened. The US go there, they say, okay, we want to keep our base here, we want to stay here, but we want you to kick out the Russian. But they didn't understand that Niger had a really long history with Russia. And I always told my friend from the US diplomatic side, I said, why you don't go to Niger, negotiate? I said, we know your relationship with Russia, it's not a problem, but we want also to work with you. And we saw this politics sometimes, you have to choose. You are with us or you're against us. And this is a major problem in Africa. And African countries don't want to hear that.
Yes.
They said, no, we have a relationship with China since the 60s. With Russia, they help us for our independence. So they don't understand. African countries, they are completely independent now. And we need to understand that. And we need to change our diplomacy. We know what's happening with France, I said before, because they didn't see this changing. And when I talk to ministers in Africa or presidents, sometimes I talk to the president of Guinea sometimes, and I always tell him it's a chess game. We have many minerals, and we have many things more than minerals in Guinea. I say you have to play with everyone. You need to have a good relationship with China, because we need China for major infrastructure, railroad, and over. But we need the US also. Because there are many things we can learn from the US. Stock exchange. Why we don't have the US to help us to open a stock exchange in Guinea? Like that, we control the price of bauxite. And yeah, I always tell them that, and I always tell them something, a citation from Charles de Gaulle. Everyone knows who's Charles de Gaulle. And Charles de Gaulle always said, states don't have friends. They have only interest. States don't have friends, they have only interest. And now, African countries, they understood that. They say, we are friends. We are friends, yes. But states, it's a state, no friend.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Voy a ser breve porque creo que los debates son muy interesantes y fructíferos.
Thank you. I will be quick. I think that the debate is very interesting and very fruitful.
Hablamos de una cooperación que pueda dar resultados, y África es lo que necesita, una cooperación que da resultados para que el continente africano, los países, puedan desarrollarse.
We have talked about a cooperation that brings benefits, and this is what Africa needs, a cooperation that brings results.
Por tanto, hablamos de eficiencia de la cooperación, hablamos de cultura y hablamos de cercanía de la administración americana.
So we talk about the closeness, the effectiveness of the United States relationship.
Por más que queramos, las perspectivas indican que entre Estados Unidos y China existe una confrontación y puede agravarse en el futuro. Hay que ser claros.
we can talk a lot of things, but at the end of the day, the competition exists, and it probably will arise the next years.
Y para eso queremos confirmar la administración americana para que cambie la estrategia, como dijo mi amigo John, para que sea más eficiente en su intervención en África.
And that's why we are negotiating with the United States to be more with the intervention in Africa to guarantee them.
Hemos hablado de cultura y cercanía, pero de Trump, el presidente Trump, es el primer presidente después de Reagan que no ha visitado África.
We talk about closeness and culture, but Trump was the first president since Reagan that didn't went to Africa.
El presidente actual Biden no ha visitado África.
Our current president Biden also did not visit Africa.
Son elementos importantes cuando hablamos de cooperación
These are important elements when we talk about cooperation,
y sobre todo cuando queremos competir con un gigante económico como China.
specifically when we want to compete with an economic giant like China.
Existe un programa definido a nivel comercial que es el programa GOA.
There's a program, there's a kind of global cooperation, there's a GOA program.
Intercambios comerciales de los países de África subsahariana con Estados Unidos.
And it's a program that talks about the transactions between sub-Saharan Africa and United States.
Pero curiosamente detrás de un programa comercial se incluyeron elementos políticos, excluyendo a unos países y contando con otros.
But this program also has politics and ideology behind because it excludes some countries and includes another ones.
Y esto no facilita la cooperación sincera entre Estados Unidos y los países de África subsahariana sobre todo.
And this doesn't facilitate the relationship between the United States and the sub-Saharan countries specifically.
Mi país, Guinea Equatorial, es un país productor de petróleo y gas, efectivamente. Yo creo que en Estados Unidos se conoce a ese país solamente por eso.
Equatorial Guinea has a huge reserves of gas and petroleum, and I think the United States only know Equatorial Guinea because of that.
Pero estamos llamando la atención a la administración americana. Ayer lo hablamos con la alcaldesa de Los Ángeles para que las empresas americanas inviertan en otros sectores de desarrollo del país.
We have been gathered the attention of the United States, and we have talked with the mayor of Los Angeles to bring companies to Equatorial Guinea.
Es el mensaje que para todos los países de África subsahariana lanza a la administración americana para que sea más eficiente y esté más cercana a los pueblos africanos.
This is the message of the sub-Saharan countries for the United States administration to be more close and to be there for the African countries.
Si no será tarde, posiblemente será tarde.
Otherwise, it's going to be late. It can possibly be late, too late. We also have talked about security and development, and China has a development that is more appreciated, where the United States, its security aspect is more appreciated.
Curiosamente, en los últimos meses, la prensa americana está hablando sobre Guinea Ecuatorial, hablando de una hipotética base militar china.
Curiously, the current United States administration is talking about a Chinese military base in Equatorial Guinea.
Mientras que la administración de Malabo confirma que todo lo que es desarrollo de su seguridad y defensa lo reserva para Estados Unidos y está esperando que la administración americana concrete acuerdos de seguridad y de defensa con el país, con Guinea Ecuatorial.
While our politics say that the security of a country is not related to the United States, and we are waiting for you to talk about infrastructure and development of Equatorial Guinea.
Porque aquí estamos en un contexto académico, los estudiantes, los funcionarios deben animar a la administración americana para que siga estando muy cerca del continente africano, para su estabilidad, para su seguridad.
So here we are in an educational context with students, employees, so you guys should pressure the U.S. Organization as a whole, government as a whole, to be more present in Africa.
El continente africano es un continente amigo de Estados Unidos. Tenemos varias personas de descendencia africana que son americanas. Por tanto, el continente africano y el continente americano son unidos, deben seguir trabajando para el desarrollo del mundo.
We are a country, we are friends, and we have a lot of American people that have African descendancy, so we should keep working in partnership to develop the world.
Gracias, thank you very much.